Hi, Movie Explained here. Today, I'm going to explain a war action movie called Ed T-34. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens up towards the tail end of 1941 as the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, dubbed as Operation Barbarossa, has reached the outskirts of Moscow. The Germans have enjoyed stunning success as their tanks have forged ahead while Luftwaffe ruled the skies. This has caused the morale of the Red Army to go down as their supply lines have been seriously hampered. Currently, Soviet Army Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Ivichkin is on his way to Butyrol, a town that is merely 35 kilometers away from Moscow. He is carrying food supplies for a group of Soviet soldiers who have set up a temporary camp in the town. Nikolai is navigating the frozen terrain in a ramshackle truck with a young private beside him. After a while, they arrive near a mileage sign that was made to give travelers the directions to nearby places. Nikolai stops the truck and disembarks with an AX in his hand. He then cuts down the sign to try and deter their enemies. Suddenly, a German Panzer III tank appears over a nearby hill and immediately opens fire towards them, but gets back into the truck and skillfully maneuvers the dilapidated vehicle to avoid incoming fire. The Soviet duo manage to escape by the skin of their teeth, thanks to Nikolai's expert knowledge of tanks and ammunition. Elsewhere, at the temporary camp in the village of Butovo, Soviet Captain Mikhail reports to his commanding officer that his battalion is down to one single tank. Mikhail himself is severely injured, which leaves them with no one to take command of the tank. The commanding officer, however, tells him to fight to the bitter end. Fortunately for him, Nikolai arrives at the camp later that night with food and essential supplies. Mikhail realizes the newcomer is an ammunition officer and immediately appoints him as the commander of the only available tank. Their mission is to cover the retreat of the Soviet battalion as well as a mobile hospital from incoming German forces. Nikolai is assigned to take charge of a damaged T-34 tank whose previous commander was killed in action. He is expected to delay the Germans' advance with only a single tank and a small number of supporting infantry. In a brilliant display of leadership, Nikolai immediately takes reins of the situation around the camp. He rounds up the soldiers who will be in the T-34 with him and briefs them on the mission. Initially, the men laugh at the suggestion that they will be facing a strong German troop with merely a single tank. However, Nikolai is an extremely serious man and does not tolerate any form of cowardice. He berates them for their laziness and tells them to thoroughly check every part of the tank. He also warns them that they will be severely punished if they continue to whine. Before leaving for a strategy meeting, he orders them to start prepping the tank for the offensive and load plenty of extra ammunition. The following day, a German SS Standartenführer, Klaus Jagger, and his men observe the village from behind a nearby tree line. He believes the Russians are planning something but is confident enough to order his crew to move forward anyway. Unbeknownst to them, Nikolai and his crew have laid an ambush for the platoon of German panzers. The Soviets have hidden their T-34 inside a haystack and are waiting for the right opportunity to strike. However, when the German tanks are in range, Jag commands his men to stop. The shrewd officer inspects the village from afar with his binoculars and sees a cannon hidden inside a shed. He orders 4 of his tanks to move forward and blow the shed to pieces. What he doesn't realize is that the cannon is made only of wood and is a setup planned by his enemies. Just then, the T-34 shoots an armor-piercing shell that destroys 2 German tanks at once. This also means that the Soviets no longer have the element of surprise and now have to face their enemies out in the open. Nikolai orders his men to drive their tank towards a barn on the edge of the village. The German soldiers retaliate by approaching on foot, waiting for the T-34 to attack again. However, the Soviet infantry takes down the German soldiers, giving the T-34 an opportunity to shoot. An intense skirmish then breaks out, in which the Soviets manage to destroy 6 panzers. Unfortunately, Jager and his men manage to chase down the enemy tank and eventually stand in a one-on-one duel against the T-34. They shoot at each other, and both the tanks are badly damaged. Half the Russian crew is killed when they attempt to escape their burning tank, but Nikolai somehow manages to get out of the T-34 and also pulls out the severely injured driver Stepan. Seeing this, an injured Jager gets out his panzer and shoots towards them before passing out due to his injuries. Nikolai and Stepan are both alive, but are soon captured by the Germans. The scene shifts to 3 years later as a train arrives at the Thuringia concentration camp in Germany, and the prisoners of war or POWs come pouring out. The warden then welcomes the prisoners, sarcastically referring to the camp as a resort. He reminds them that Germans are now their masters. It is then revealed that Nikolai has been a prisoner in the camp for 3 years and has refused to give his name. With the help of the camp's interpreter, a bilingual Russian prisoner Anya, The warden threatens to kill him. He also orders his men to put Nikolai in a special unit where they torture him for information about his name and rank. A few weeks later, Jager, who is now a Stendedenführer, arrives at the concentration camp. He gains permission from the warden to recruit an experienced tank crew from the Soviet POWs in the camp. Jager plans to use the prisoners as dummy opponents for training the Nazi Panzer Division. The following day, he goes through the camp's records and recognizes Nikolai's photograph. He is well aware of the Soviet soldiers' mastery of tanks and thus sets up a meeting. Jager proposes to Nikolai the idea of training Nazi soldiers under his command. But as expected, the latter sees this as an act of betrayal towards his nation and refuses to help. The cunning Jaeger then threatens to kill Anya, which eventually forces Nikolai to accept the offer. The next day, Nikolai is forced to choose his crew from the other POWs in the camp. He picks out 3 other Soviet soldiers with prior experience with tanks. These include Stepan, his previous driver, Ionov, who used to work as an ammunition loader, and Volchkov, who was previously a tank gunner. This group of POWs is assigned to fix and prepare a captured Soviet T-34-85 tank for a test later that week. Following this, Nikolai enters the tank to assess the internal equipment. But once he is inside, he comes across a harrowing sight. There are several decaying bodies of Soviet soldiers who must have died while fighting the Nazis. He is devastated to see his fallen comrades, but suddenly notices something that blows his mind. Hidden underneath the floor are 6 rounds of armor-piercing shells and hand grenades. Nikolai quickly comes up with a plan to use the tank as well as the rounds to his advantage. So, he goes out and tells Jaeger about the dead bodies inside. He also gets permission to bury his fallen comrades. Nikolai and his crew members then wrap the live rounds along with the dead bodies with grey cloth. They then bury both the ammunition and the bodies under a pile of stone. As weeks pass by, the chosen Soviet POWs gradually restore and strengthen the captured T-34-85 tank. Nikolai also secretly builds a model map of the whole camp and its surrounding area using a pile of mud. He then briefs the other Soviet soldiers and proclaims that he has a plan to escape. Initially, the tank driver Stepan refuses and points out that they will never be able to escape as there are too many German panzers in the area. However, he eventually agrees when Nikolai reminds him that a soldier's duty is to fight till the end. A few evenings later, Jager calls Nikolai for a meeting regarding the approaching test. The German officer gives him a detailed explanation about the ground on which the test will take place. Jager also tells him where the T-34-85 should be positioned on the field. However, Nikolai says that he should be the one to decide where the T-34 will be placed. That way, the German trainees will have to deal with an unexpected scenario which will improve their real-life decision-making capabilities. Jager, who was impressed with Nikolai's stealth in their previous battle, readily agrees to this. In the next scene, the day of the exercise finally arrives, and Jager prepares the trainee German soldiers. Nikolai and his men, on the other hand, sneakily retrieve the armor-piercing shells from the stone grave and load them in their tank. The training soon begins, and the first German tanks set off to approach the Russian T-34. While this is going on, Anja goes to Jaeger's office to steal a map that shows a safe route out of the area. She also steals a pass that would allow her to get out of the camp for a day. Back at the training field, Nikolai's crew creates a smoke screen to mask their movements. The Germans still believe that the T-34 is unarmed and are unprepared for what's about to happen. But when the T-34 fires a shell and utterly destroys the trainees' first panzer tank, they are stunned. Seconds later, another shell is fired directly into the observation tower. The resulting explosion kills most of the officers inside, except for Jager and another soldier who jump out at the last second. The T-34 then storms through the training grounds car park and eventually breaks through the main gate. On the other hand, Anja uses the stolen pass and makes her way to the nearest bus stop just outside the camp. The tankers soon pick her up, much to the surprise of common German people who are waiting at the stop. With the help of the stolen map, Nikolai plots a course towards Czechoslovakia and back to the front line of the Soviet army. After a few hours, Nikolai and his hungry crew stop at a town to find some much-needed fuel, new clothing, and fresh food. The people in the town are completely helpless as they watch the Soviets take whatever they need. As they move out of the town, they suddenly encounter a blockade equipped with a towed anti-tank gun. Nikolai's crew drives the tank off the road and right through the woods, avoiding the German attack. They barely manage to dodge several gunshots, but eventually disappear into the deep forest. Meanwhile, Jaeger receives news that the Russian escapees have managed to cross the blockade. He theorizes that they are heading to the border and asks for air support to survey the area. After driving for a few hours, Stepan points out that the tank will overheat soon. Nikolai thus orders him to take them to a nearby mountain pass where they can spend the night. They then pull off into the woods to rest for the time being. The crew come out of the T-34 after several hours of grueling travel and enjoy their freedom by bathing in a nearby lake while Anya prepares dinner. Meanwhile, Yager takes to the sky in a double-seater fighter aircraft to fight Nicholas T-34. He doesn't locate them but is able to track the path they'll be taking to reach Czechoslovakia. So when he gets back to the German base, he takes command of 4 panzers. Yager plans to ambush the Soviets in a small town of Klingenthal, which falls on the way to Czechoslovakia. Back in the forest, Nikolai holds a meeting where he suggests abandoning the tank and splitting up. He believes they have a better chance of survival if they go individually. However, the crew insists on staying with him and is reluctant to leave their beloved tank. That night, while the other crew members sleep, Nikolai and Anya talk to each other out in the forest. It is obvious that the two have a romantic chemistry brewing between them, but their moment of intimacy is unceremoniously interrupted by faint sounds of approaching tanks. As a seasoned war veteran, Nikolai realizes that the Germans are out to hunt them. He tells Anya to walk eastward through the forest and wait for them at a meadow near Klingenthal. If they do not return by the next night, she must leave under the cover of darkness. Nikolai and the crew then say their goodbyes for now. Only a few hours later, the T-34 enters the town of Klingenthal, where it immediately encounters the first of the 4 panzers. Volchko knows that it is almost impossible to pierce the German tank through its front end. He thus comes up with a brilliant idea and fires a shot right underneath the panzer. The shell ricochets off the pavement and penetrates its underbelly. Unfortunately, this only proves to be the start of what will soon become a gruesome fight of survival. Nikolai realizes they are surrounded by the remaining 3 panzers, including the one commanded by Yager. All the escape routes are blocked, but he comes up with a risky plan. He hands Volchkov a single grenade and orders him to distract one of the 3 panzers. Reacting swiftly, Volchkov grabs the grenade and slips out of the T-34. Luck is on his side as a thick fog covers the entire town. He sneakily reaches a panzer and notices that its hatch is open. The commander of that German tank is surveying the area and doesn't see Volchkov arrive until it's too late. The latter pushes the German commander back inside and chucks his grenade inside the tank. He then quickly closes the hatch and waits until everyone inside is blown to pieces. This is enough to catch the 2 other panzers off guard. Stepin uses this opportunity and crashes the T-34 through the surrounding building. They arrive right next to an enemy tank and shoot an armor-piercing shell. They have now managed to destroy 2 panzers, but their troubles are far from over. Shortly afterwards, the other 2 panzers arrive on the scene, and one aims at Nikolai. However, Volchkov, who is now inside a German tank, fires a shell and destroys the 3rd panzer. The only remaining German tank is now under the command of the formidable Jaeger. He quickly shows his mettle by disposing of the captured panzer and badly wounding Volchko in the process. Following this, the 2 remaining tanks, captured by Yager and Nikolai, move outside the town and face off over a narrow stone bridge across a river. They charge at each other, and Yager fires several shots at the T-34 but fails to disable it. Nikolai, on the other hand, has only 1 shell and waits for the perfect moment to fire it. Seconds later, both the tanks fire at the same time, and in the resulting explosion, most of the German crew is killed. Yager, who is wounded but still alive, realizes that his tank is now practically useless. Following this, Nikolai orders his driver to ram the panzer, pushing it to the edge of the bridge. This forces Yager to crawl out of the hatch, and he finds Nikolai aiming a stolen rifle at him. However, the Soviet soldier puts his gun down and decides to spare his enemy's life. He tries to pull Yager to safety, but the latter lets go. Yager then falls to his death as his panzer tips over the bridge and plummets into the river. In the aftermath of this event, the Soviet crew carries the injured Volchkov on a makeshift stretcher and meets with Anya outside the town. They then make their way towards the Russian lines on foot.